The Idaho Stop has been scientifically proven to reduce crashes and save lives.
What? No, it hasn't, and I can prove that. Hello everyone, hope you're having a great day. My name is Vince, and thank you for joining me for this special Advocacy In Action episode of Secrets of the Trails. If you spent any time in cycling circles, you've probably heard claims like these. The Idaho Stop has been proven to reduce crashes. States with Idaho Stop laws have fewer bicycle injuries. The science proves rolling through stop signs is safer than stopping. Now, those are powerful claims, but are they actually true? Today we're going to dig into what the research really says, and just as importantly, what it doesn't say. What is the Idaho Stop? First, let's define what we're talking about. The term Idaho Stop comes from a law first adopted by the state of Idaho in 1982. Contrary to what many people believe, it does not allow bicyclists to simply ignore stop signs. Instead, it generally allows a cyclist to treat a stop sign as a yield sign. That means that the rider must slow down, yield to anyone with a right-of-way, stop if necessary, and only proceed when it's safe. Some states also allow bicyclists to treat certain red lights as stop signs while others don't. Delaware limits its rule by roadway configuration, while Washington, D.C. has a narrow red light provision. These laws are not interchangeable. As of mid-2026, statewide stop as yield laws appear to include Idaho, Delaware, Arkansas, Oregon, Washington, Utah, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Colorado, Minnesota, and New Mexico. Washington, D.C. has that narrow version, while Alaska's prominent example is local to Anchorage rather than statewide. Now, let's be clear, stop sign as yield and red light as stop are actually two different legal concepts, even though they're often lumped together under the term Idaho Stop. Supporters of such laws frequently point to several studies as proof that these laws improve safety, but do they really prove anything? You've heard me say this before, I'm a medical provider and I read studies critically to ensure that they have been done as comprehensively as possible. So let's take a look at the studies that Idaho Stop proponents hold up as proof that the laws work. The studies, Meggs. The single most cited study as supposed proof that Idaho Stop law saves lives is a 2010 non-peer-reviewed master's thesis by then-master's student Jason Meggs at the University of California, Berkeley. This study is the source of the famous claim that bicycle injuries in Idaho dropped about 14.5% after the law was adopted. It's also the source of the claim that Boise cyclists experienced injury rates 30 to 60% lower than cyclists in Sacramento. Now, on the surface, those numbers sound impressive, but here's where we have to distinguish between an observation and proof, a distinction that's extremely important if a study is to be considered valid. Meggs looked at the reported injuries in Idaho before and after the law was enacted. What Meggs didn't do was prove that the law actually caused those injuries to decline. The research would need to account for things like changes in bicycle ridership, weather, traffic volumes, infrastructure improvements, enforcement, reporting practices, and many other variables, all things that Meggs did not do. So without controlling for those factors, it's impossible to know whether the law actually deserves the credit or not. Also, Meggs's Boise versus Sacramento comparison has severe limitations. Boise, Idaho, and Sacramento, California are two very different cities. Different populations, different road networks, different traffic volumes, different bicycle infrastructure, different commuting patterns, and different climates. Any of those factors could influence crash rates. So while the comparison may be interesting, Meggs' evaluation does nothing to isolate the effect of the Idaho Stop law itself. In other words, while Meggs' claim of injury reduction may be real, the claim that the law caused it is much harder to prove, and that absolutely cannot be proven by Meggs' frankly poorly done study. The studies, Bike Delaware. The second statistic we often hear was originally cited by Bike Delaware involving the stop as yield law that Delaware adopted in 2017. After Delaware adopted its stop as yield law, Bike Delaware, the state's cycling advocacy organization, set about trying to prove that their state's new law was just as good as Idaho's. But here's the problem with the so-called Delaware study. It isn't actually a real study. It went like this. The underlying crash data came from the Delaware State Police using data covering 30 months before and 30 months after the Bicycle-Friendly Delaware Act took effect in October 2017. The Delaware State Police provided the data to Bike Delaware, who published the now widely cited 23% figure using those police data. However, there does not appear to be a publicly available technical report from the Delaware State Police or the Delaware DOT documenting the methodology behind that analysis. So there's no way to account for the myriad of variables that must be addressed if the published figures are to be considered valid. Making this seeming publicity stunt even worse, a technical report and review performed by UC Berkeley's Institute of Transportation Studies in 2024 did a much more methodologically sound review of the effects of the Delaware law as well as other states as part of a technical report that could be used as a basis for consideration of a similar law in California. The Berkeley study found that the publicly available information doesn't fully explain the methods that the Delaware State Police or Bike Delaware used to arrive at their 23% figure. So again, while the numbers from Delaware sound encouraging, we have to look realistically. Without detailed methodology, exposure data, confidence intervals, and appropriate controls, there's no way anyone can say legitimately that the Delaware law actually produced the numbers that Bike Delaware claims. The studies. Whyte. In 2013, another graduate student, Brandon Whyte at the University of Illinois, attempted to compare bicycle crashes in Boise with crashes in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. He used police crash reports, but again, failed to factor in all of the variables that we mentioned earlier. While Whyte did find some differences in overall crash severity, he found no statistically significant reduction in serious injuries. And when his analysis focused specifically on stop sign intersections, the very locations where the law should matter most, he found no statistically significant reduction in serious injuries or fatalities. And that's an important point. If a law is intended to improve safety at stop signs, we'd hope to see the clearest evidence there. But when Whyte found no statistically significant reduction, that doesn't amount to a glowing endorsement of such laws. The studies, NHTSA 2024. Now, let's fast forward to the newest research. In late 2024, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration released what is probably the strongest study conducted so far. Unlike the earlier research, the NHTSA study examined multiple metropolitan areas, used comparison locations, adjusted for COVID-related travel changes, and attempted to account for bicycle and vehicle volumes. The findings were encouraging. The researchers found evidence that stop-as-yield laws were associated with reduced bicycle crashes in certain locations. They also found little evidence that these laws encouraged reckless bicycle riding, and that's significant too. But here's the part that's often left out. The researchers also concluded that they found little evidence of reduced injury severity. And they acknowledged that their study identified associations, but not direct proof of causation, and that's a crucial distinction. Association means two things occurred together. Causation means one thing actually caused the other, and those are not the same thing. Making it make sense. So where does that leave us? Looking at the entire body of research, there are three conclusions that are well supported. First, there is very little evidence that Idaho Stop laws make road bicycling more dangerous. The fears expressed by some opponents of such laws simply haven't been supported by the available data. Second, there is moderate evidence suggesting that these laws may reduce certain types of bicycle crashes, particularly at some intersections, and that's encouraging, but it's still an area where additional research would be valuable. Third, the currently available evidence does not actually prove that Idaho Stop laws save lives, nor does it prove that rolling through a stop sign is inherently safer than making a complete stop. Those claims go way beyond what the available research actually demonstrates. But read through a lot of articles and advocacy pieces about this topic and you'll see how often people talk about all the studies. In reality, there are surprisingly few, and we've just outlined them. Much of what gets repeated ad infinitum online traces back to those handful of original studies, with later articles and advocacy organizations continually reciting the same research over and over again. In fact, many subsequent pieces of work, like these ones that many supporters cite, are not actually studies of crash data relevant to Idaho Stop type laws, but are conference papers, surveys, and observational reports. None of them have actually studied crash data before and after a law is put in place. Instead, they're little more than opinion pieces. And in the case of Lynn, that uses the word study in the title, it's actually a study of cyclist behavior and not an evaluation of the effects of legislation. Now, none of this makes the conclusions in the handful of work that actually attempted to study crash data wrong, but it does remind us to be careful about confusing repetition with independent confirmation. As any scientist will tell you, independent confirmation or repeatability is absolutely necessary in order to accept a study's premise as valid. Where do we go from here? At the end of the day, reasonable people can disagree about whether Idaho Stop laws are good public policy. Personally, I think the strongest argument in favor of these laws is not that the laws have been proven to save lives, because none of the research to date actually proves that. Rather, I think the strongest argument in favor of these laws is that they appear to legalize a cautious behavior that many road cyclists already perform, without any clear evidence that doing so makes roads less safe for cyclists. That's a much more measured claim, and one that's better supported by the available evidence. So instead of pushing the unprovable claim that the research proves it, what cycling advocacy organizations, legislators, police, and other interested parties should be doing is actively pushing for better studies to be done to actually prove if the laws reduce injury and save lives or not. Be aware of the laws where you are. Finally, just remember, not every state has such laws, so be aware of what your state's laws are. And if you're traveling to ride a trail or do road cycling elsewhere, don't assume that the state that you're going to be visiting has a particular law or not. Make sure before you ride by looking it up. As always, whatever the law says in your home state, the most important rule is simple: slow down. Yield to anyone with a right-of-way. Never assume that another road user sees you, and only proceed when you know it's safe. That's advice that applies well whether you're riding a bicycle, an e-bike, or even driving a car. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, but most importantly, with all of our advocacy videos, please share this with other cyclists so that we can all be aware of the reality around these laws and act as safely as possible on the roads that we ride on. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you out on the trails. Have a great ride.